Today we are going to dive into the dark and fascinating world of Canaanite gods and rituals, one of the most horrible and brutal cultures in ancient history. Throughout history, all cultures have had their own vision of angels, demons, spirits, and ghosts. But the Canaanites, around the year 200 BC, are known for their deities and horrifying rituals. Throughout historical and religious writings, the accounts of these gods range from the macabre to the horrifying, with practices that today seem unthinkable to us, such as human sacrifices and rituals that unleash terror. If you are a history lover, subscribe now so you don't miss the most fascinating updates from around the world. Moloch, the god of human sacrifice. The most recognizable and possibly the most terrifying god of this region is Moloch. Moloch, whose name means the ruler, is the Canaanite god with the head of a bull, known for demanding human sacrifices, and more specifically, child sacrifices. Of all the Canaanite gods mentioned in the Bible and in contemporary literature, Moloch is perhaps the most brutal and bloodthirsty. Sometimes he is described as a fallen angel, while other times he is simply a false god whose influence irreparably corrupted the local population. The first mentions of Moloch go back to the book of Leviticus in the Bible, and he also appears in the books of Kings and Jeremiah. There, he is described as a false god worshipped by the blasphemous Canaanites. The Israelites, upon traveling to neighboring lands, encountered an indescribable horror. A gigantic statue in the center of the city, with a half-human, half-jackal image. Its chest housed a blazing fire, where people gathered to make sacrifices. Initially, they offered grains and animals, but the god's hunger was not satisfied. Eventually, the Canaanites began to offer their own children, throwing them into this giant furnace. The children's screams were quickly drowned as the smoke rose through the statue's nostrils. This sacrifice was received with great fanfare, music, chants, and prayers, even from the parents themselves. Often, the laws of the Israelites in the Bible, like not getting tattoos or not marrying someone from another religion, may seem confusing. However, when delving into the history of the time, it becomes clear that the practices of neighboring peoples were extremely disturbing. For example, the word Holocaust comes from the experience of the Israelites witnessing human sacrifices. In the Bible, in Leviticus, it is explicitly mentioned that if someone offers their child to Moloch, they will be punished with death, and the community must stone that person. This clear mandate reflects the outright rejection of Moloch and his horrific rituals. The role of Moloch in the fall of King Solomon. Although God's warnings against Moloch were very clear, King Solomon, the wisest of all the kings of Israel, fell under the influence of pagan gods. Solomon, famous for his wisdom, began to succumb to the temptation of women from neighboring peoples and allowed the worship of pagan gods in his kingdom. Despite God's explicit warnings, the king allowed the worship of Moloch and other gods to infiltrate his kingdom. This was one of the factors that contributed to the fall of his kingdom, which is described in the Bible as a decline due to the influence of pagan cults. Asherah, the goddess of fertility. Next, we have Asherah, the resident goddess of fertility, whose name means she who enriches. Asherah was one of the most important figures in Canaanite mythology and, according to some texts, might have been the wife of Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. Her relationship with Yahweh, if it existed, is one of the most mysterious and debated aspects of religious history. However, before delving into her connection with Yahweh, let's review what we know about Asherah. Asherah was the consort of El, the Semitic creator god, and was considered the mother of the gods. Although later the Canaanites began to worship Baal as the chief god, Asherah and El were seen as the primordial couple in Canaanite religion. Asherah was strongly associated with the sea and sacred places, and her name was used to describe both the goddess and a holy place. She was known as the nurse of the gods and acted as a mediator, resolving disputes between them and seeking reconciliation. Over time, Asherah lost some of her popularity and her image was overshadowed by other goddesses like Anat and Astarte. Despite this, the cult of Asherah endured, and in the Bible, she is mentioned several times in relation to the idolatry of the Israelites. In many accounts, the Israelites fall into the worship of Asherah, building poles, pillars, of wood that represented the goddess, which were placed in worship sites. the connection of Asherah with Yahweh. A particularly intriguing aspect of Asherah is her possible relationship with Yahweh. Archaeological excavations in the ancient city of Arad, in the Kingdom of Judah, have revealed strange findings, such as 2 standing stones with incense burners beside them, suggesting that the Israelites might have worshipped Asherah alongside Yahweh. Additionally, in inscriptions found in the Sinai region, phrases like Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah are mentioned, which has puzzled many scholars. This suggests that, at certain times, the Israelites might have considered Asherah as the consort of their god. However, this interpretation is very controversial. Some believe that Asherah simply represented a holy place, and not necessarily a wife of Yahweh. Others argue that the Israelites, influenced by neighboring Canaanite religions, might have confused Asherah as the consort of their god, El. Conclusion: the Canaanite gods and their cults. Through gods like Moloch and Asherah, we can see the deep influence of Canaanite religions on surrounding cultures, including that of Israel. These deities were known for their horrific rituals, such as human sacrifices and ritual prostitution practices. Despite the Israelites' efforts to reject these beliefs, traces of the worship of these entities are found throughout history. The study of these cultures and their religions allows us to understand not only the history of ancient peoples but also how religions can influence politics, morality, and daily life. The Canaanite gods, with their brutality and extravagance, remind us of the dark depths of human religious history. Don't forget to subscribe and comment on what topic you'd like us to explore in the next video.